Do a review on Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chovtes, volume 29, the Sicha for Parshas Tovo. Of course, in this parsha, it talks about the bikurim, the first ripened fruit that you bring to the Kohen, you bring to Yerushalayim, to the Beis Hamikdash, and we also, it says in the pasuk that he takes the tena, he takes the basket. The question is, what's the status of this basket? So there is a Rambam over here, and the Rambam makes a distinction what the basket is made out of, or the holder is made out of metal. Then the owners take it back, and if it's made out of willows, a regular basket, then the Kohen gets to keep it. And the question is that it seems from the Rambam different than we find in the Gemara, uh, the, uh, the reasoning why you keep it, why you give it back, and the Rebbe is going to ask several questions, how to understand the Rambam over here, and to fit him in with the Gemara. The Rebbe will explain how this basket's relationship is to the actual bikurim. The Rebbe is going to bring down three possibilities, and actually the Rambam has a fourth possibility. According to the Rambam, the basket is part of the bikurim together. The only thing is sometimes you bring it back. This is going to be a whole detailed discussion. We're learning the Sicha Lil Nishmas Rav Levi Yitzchak ben Rabbi Chaim Tzvi. We'll go to Sicha step by step. Parshas Tovo. Aleph. Benegeya to mitzvahs bikurim, as it relates to the mitzvah of bikurim. So vos ha-bikurim tu'unim kli. The bikurim require a vessel, which means these fruits, the first fruits that you bring to the Beis Hamikdash, to the Kohen, they need a basket, they need a vessel in which you put them in. Zog the Rambam says like this. Heviu beklei matches, if you bring it in a metal vessel, the Kohen takes the bikurim from within the vessel, then the vessel is returned to its owners. But v'im heviyam bekli arava v'chalof, there are different baskets made out of willow, and the Rebbe has a whole, this chalof over here, what exactly that is. But anyways, it's made of sort of inferior kind of a basket, of a vessel, not like a metal basket, or similar to that in a lesser kinds of basket, not like metal, not like expensive. So then both the bikurim and the baskets, they all go to the Kohen. So the Rambam is basically distinction between what kind of keli the bikurim come in. He doesn't bring out any distinction who brings it, whether it's a rich person, a poor person. Will contrast it soon with the Gemara. According to the Rambam, it all depends on what kind of a type of a keli is it. If it's more expensive keli, it's a metal keli, then it goes back to the owners who brought the bikurim. Kohen takes out the bikurim and gives back the vessel, the keli. If it's a rava or a chalaf, another a lesser grade of a basket, so then the Kohen gets to keep the basket. Okay. So the Rebbe says, how does this fit with what the Gemara says, which is the source, the Mishnah in Bikurim, which is the source for the Rambam's halacha? Over there, it seems like the difference has to do with the one who brings it. If it's a rich person that brings it, he has in mind to take back the vessels. He just brings it in a fancy vessel. A poor person who can't afford an expensive vessel, he has in mind to give that. The Rambam doesn't associate it to the one who brings it, but rather to the vessel itself. Darf man verstehen, der Mocker von dem Din is, the source for this halacha is, V'meforshim tzeichen and on, as pointed out, as referenced by the commentators, the Mishnah in Bikurim, the Mishnah in Bikurim. So over there it says, Ha'ashirim meviim b'chayreihem b'kalotos shel kesef v'shel zov. The wealthy ones, they would bring their Bikurim in vessels made out of silver, made out of gold. V'ha'aniyim, and the poor people, meviim oisam b'salin nitzorim, they would bring them in baskets made out of nitzorim, of willows, of shalarova, of the willows, klufa that has been peeled. So v'hasalim v'habikurim. So these baskets, together with the bikurim nitonim lakoyin, are given to the kohen. And what does the Gemara learn from the fact that the rich people get to take their basket back, and the poor people get to leave their baskets? The Gemara says there's an expression that the poor person is followed by further expenses, whereas the rich person get richer, because the poor person in this case not only does he give the bikurim, he leaves the basket there, and the rich person, he gets to take it back. And from that Mishnah learned the Gemara, from this Mishnah the Gemara learns out, Minoha milso da amri inshi. Bosar Anya Ozla Aniyusa. Where do we know this? That the people say that after one who is poor, poorness follows him. He goes to. So the Gemara says from this Mishnah, where do we see this saying? People say that the poorness follows the poor person. He says the Tanakh, because the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, Ashirim, they get the back. Vanim chulu hasalim v'abikurim neisnin makoyim. You give it all to the kohen. From them is mashma bepashto. So what do we see from this in the Gemara? From this, as we see it simply, that the rich people don't want to give part to the kohen, so they get to take it back. The poor people, they have it's a small value of the basket. They're okay with the kohen with keeping it. For them is mashma bepashtus. From this, it appears simply as the chiluk tzvishum klotis shel zov unsalin nitzorim, that the difference between these vessels of gold or these baskets of nitzorim venzich in das anoisen. This hinges upon the person whether what he wants to do with the basket. In other words, he doesn't have to bring the basket. He doesn't have to give the basket. But if he decides to give it, the rich person doesn't want to give it, and the poor person gives it. Since on the normal way, Flegen Dashirim bringen the Bikurim entire Kelim, they would bring their Bikurim in expensive vessels, so Kesef V'Shel of silver and gold. Haben die Neustim nicht gehabt, b'deya wegzugeben the Teire Kelim. So the givers of the Bikurim had not in mind, they didn't have in mind to give away their expensive vessels. Rashi sagt meferish. Rashi says it very clearly. The rich people would not give. It's not that they wouldn't take it, they would not give it to him. So it's up to them. They would not give it. Why would they not give it? The Pashtus leaves their Teirkeit. It was expensive. They didn't give it. Und the Farger they to the Bailam. That's why they belong to the owners. They never gave it to the basket. The baskets just served as a means to bring the Bikurim to this, but he never gave the baskets to the Kohen. Mashenke the Aniyim, as opposed to the poor people. The Bikurim in Kelim Salin Nitzorim. They bring the Bikurim in vessels of basket of Nitzorim. They don't can't afford to bring more expensive vessels. They have in mind to gift it also. So it's an additional gift that they give to the Kohen. They give in the baskets. And the Ribbe belangen the salim to the Kohanim. That's why these baskets also belong to the Kohen. So this also fits very well with the Gemara Sok. Was Shapir was the Gemara bringt. This fits well as opposed to, as we'll see a little later, it's not so understood. So this fits well what the Gemara says, zum klal, the amri inshe bosar anye azla aniyusa, that after a poor person, there follows his level of poorness, which means like this. Asulibdem vos is an oni, that because he's poor, bringt the bikurim and salanitzorim, then he brings the baskets, the bikurim, in these baskets, in these cheap baskets. He's oslan yusuf. Then he becomes even poorer. Also, these vessels remain by the kohen. So this fits. It has to do with the poor person giving, and he brings it in the poor baskets because that's what he can afford, and therefore he doesn't care about it, so he leaves it there. So that means not only does he give the bikurim, but he ends up losing the basket as well because he is poor and because he can't afford bigger baskets. The rich person could afford bigger baskets, so he doesn't give it away; he gets it back. But the Rambam doesn't say anything to do with the person's status of giving it. The Rambam of it is madgish the mechiluk. The Rambam emphasizes the difference what the vessel is. Tzvishun klei matches to klei arove. He just says that this is metal vessels and this is vessel made out of willows. Nit der monnig dem Unterschied zwischen Osher and Oni, without mentioning the distinction that this is a rich person, it's a poor person. Is the full mashma. So from this it appears as the dasa Rambam is just nit tolu in dasa nesim. That in the Rambam it's not because he wants to give it and he doesn't want to give it. There is something inherently in the basket. Was wenzich in the Teierkeit or the Billigkeit from the kelim that would hinge on how expensive and how cheap the kelim are. So that's how much the giver is ready to give it away as well. But the Rambam doesn't make it depending on that. He just says matches. And the fact also that he says matches is not necessarily expensive. So the Rambam doesn't go by expensive or less befrat. As klimatches can euch sein azavas hat nit kein größer shivri. It can be such a metal vessel that it does not have such great value. So according to the Rambam, that's not the difference. Nor der chiluk is verbunden mit asuk kelik shelatzme. It's an independent what the vessel is. Tzidos is a klei matches or the klei arova v'chalav. Whether it's a metal vessel or it's a klei arova v'chalav. So in the Rambam, we don't understand so much. So what are we gonna have to say? So why does it say the poor person goes poor, that he gives it away, that he is even poor? It's not that the poor person gives it away and he ends up losing it. It is just because the fact of the matter is that the poor person normally who brings in these not metal vessels is going to end up losing it. That's the explanation of the saying that one who was poor ends up getting even poorer because of the fact is that he brings in a simple basket. That basket will be confiscated or be taken also by the kohen. So he loses it, not because he gives them, not like we learned before. If that's the case, so we have to say, according to the Rambam's view, those was the Gemara zog the moker zum klal. The fact that the Gemara gives the source for the rule, the Amri in Shemos Ranya, this is that people say that following poor comes more poor. But in this case, the poor person doesn't give it really away. From the Mishnah Bekurim, we learned it in the Mishnah Bekurim, Ashirim Evim Chulu, the rich people bring in the expensive silver, gold. Meintes nit der far was by a keli shaloni. So it doesn't mean because a vessel of a poor person is das anoisen to give the keli zum kohen. The poor person has the mind to give it to the kohen. So it means the poor person gives away also these, not because of that. Nor from the mesuba from the halacha. But it's only a result of the halacha. And only karogil bringt in klinitzorim. Because according to the Rambam, it's all what kind of keli was brought. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a cheap or expensive, gives it away. But ordinarily, the result is in actuality, an oni kirogil, an oni on most cases usually brengt in klinitzorem. He brings it in these cheaper vessels. When azamin kele da bleibt man kohen, that needs to remain by the kohen. But the tzorich bir with Asa Rambam, so we need to explain the Rambam's opinion. Because the Gemara, it seems like it has to do with wealthy or not wealthy. The Rambam has to do just with the Keli. What is the explanation of the Asa the Rambam, as the Rebbe will articulate it as we continue to develop the idea in the Sicha later on. In Ois Beis, the Rebbe brings down a Sifri. So besides the Gemara that the Rebbe brought down before, in which it says clearly that the difference between the Kalim seems like that the rich person doesn't want to give away and the poor person wants to give away because it's not expensive. The Rebbe brings down a Sifri. In the Sifri, it seems like there is an additional obligation for giving a keli from the pasuk besides the bikurim. It's not only that the bikurim are put in a keli, but there's something about giving the keli itself and to the kohen. Torah says give the bikurim. Torah says give the keli. Let's look inside. Base. From pasuk. So the kohen shall take the basket from your hand. Steht in Sifri. So this is written in the Sifri. Mekan omru. So from here, our sages tell us ha'ashirim mivim biklos bikurim biklosis shel kesef v'shel zav. That the wealthy bring their bikurim in baskets of silver and gold, and v'aniim b'salin nitzorim shalarova, and the poor people they bring it in these basket woven from nitzorim, from the willow. Shalarova klufa, that of a peeled arova. So over here, v'salim nitonim lekohanim, liskois matona lekohanim. We'll see soon the taich over here exactly, but basically this Sifri says that you give from the pasuk that the kohen will take the basket. We learn out that the kohen actually takes the basket if it is arova klufa v'salim, if it's made of arov and klufa, v'salim nitonim l'kohanim, you give the salim to kohanim, this is matonim l'kohanim. So, because the Torah, as the Rebbe will explain now, because the Torah writes hatena, tena appears to be like a cheap basket. It's like the basket made of nitzorim and arova. So why did the Torah say v'loch hakoyin hatena? Why didn't the Torah say v'loch hakoyin miyodecha? For the pasuk says that you put it into a keli. It doesn't say loch hakoyin. It doesn't say keli. It says hatena. So to say that the tena, if it's in a tena, which is the arova klufa, nitzorim shel salim shel arova klufa, then you give it to the kohen to have a maton. The Rebbe explains, learn them Mefarshim. So Mefarshim learned them Pirush b'divra Sifri. What does the Sifri mean? That from the word hatene, the word hatene was l'cheire is an Iberik. It's extra. Could have said lokach hakoyim miyodecha. Learned them up as der din v'lok hakoyim. The kohen takes it and it becomes his. Und so wird seine is davke kshu tena. It's only when it's a tena salbe alma, just a plain basket. Not that klotis kesef zov they go expensive. Mashenkin if a kli matches ukayetze. If it's a metal vessel or similar, then you don't, the Kohen doesn't get to keep it. So here it almost seems like very supporting to the Rambam. Seems supporting to the Rambam because it makes a difference between matches and not. The Rebbe continues with the Pirush of the Tosfos Yontif, but in the Sifri it says the reason. Under Tama Dover is Liskes Matona Lukahanim. Why do we give the basket if it's of Nitzorim? We learn from the Pasuk. Atena is in order for the Kohanim to get a gift. What does that mean? What do you mean the gift to the Kohanim? They're getting the Bikurim. So the Tosfos Yontif explains. But the Tosfos Yontif is Mevayer. Hayos as the Bikurim Peres from the Anim Zaine Ma'at, since the fruit of the Bikurim, fruit, the poor people brought is just a little bit, the Riber, the Hotman Misakin given, that's why they instituted as an Oni Zolavegem Oichdem Sal to give also the basket. So he gives the fruit with the basket. Was Imasal Yenechshav Matona, together with the basket, that is considered a gift. There is not enough in the fruit itself to be. So that's why the Torah said, Lokachatena, take along the tena. In this case, so that this should be a substantial something, enough of a maton. So maybe this would be the explanation of the Rambam. That's why the Rambam says the difference between this keli and this keli, metal keli, because the Torah says you only give away the tene when it's cheap. That's why it's a tene that you give it away, and not what's a real keli. That's why the Rambam makes the chiluk, not from the Gemara Aniyim Vashirim, but from this Sifri. But when you think about it, the Rebbe asks, because this too, why is the cheaper one so that it should be basket given to the kohen? The tana is because it's less. There's not enough fruit from the bikurim. So again, it's up to not to the keli's value. That has to do with the amount of bikurim that you're giving. Sizober move on, as we cannot learn in das Rambam. We can't learn so in the view of the Rambam like this Sifri. Because according to this, it really hinges on the main thing. Nit in der keli in welchem bring the bikurim. It's not really in what vessel you bring the bikurim, nor in kamus aperes was man bringt the bikurim, but rather in the quantity of fruit that you bring for the bikurim. So that mainly depends not in der kele, not in the vessel, in welchem bringt the bikurim, that you bring the bikurim. Not in kamus aperus must man bringt the bikurim, but the quantity of fruit that you bring for bikurim. Und das werden sich wieder, and that again, what's the difference? The kama, who brings more in the mechilik zwischen ashirim und aniyim, between the rich and the poor, and therefore the poor's people who bring less put it into a basket that is less value, and we give it all to the kohen. Beis as the Rambam, but the Rambam doesn't mention that. Is nor mechalik now ben suge hakelim atzmom. He doesn't distinguish only what keli is it metal or not. He doesn't mention a difference between the poor and the rich in kamos hapedes in the kelim, the quantity of fruit which are in the keli doesn't make that difference over there. So, what's the source for the Rambam? And so, not the Gemara and not the Sifri. Ois Gimel. Ois Gimel. So the Rebbe now we'll explain all this by suggesting that there's three possibilities how we look at as the gift of the kalim. Is it just two separate? You have to give the bikurim and the kalim. Is it the kalim also part of it, or is the actual giving? The Rebbe will make a chiluk distinction. Do you have to give it to the kalim? Do you have to give it to any kohen, or you have to give it to that kohen that you give the bikurim, or you have to give it at least to the kahanim of that of the mishmar who you're bringing the bikurim to, or you need to give it to exactly that same kohen? This all depend on what is the obligation of giving the basket also when you give the bikurim. And the Rebbe will say that the Rambam actually learns a fourth way, but let's go and explain the three ways in Nois Gimel. Yeshlemer de Bir Bazer. So we can say the explanation in this. The Geder Hachiyu from the Sinas Hasal to the Kohanim. The definition of giving the basket to the Kohanim, zusammen mit die Bikurim, together with the Bikurim, kemalena bekama ifanim. We can learn this in many ways. Umayhem, the Rebbe is going to suggest three possible ways. Number one, that this is two separate chiyuvim. There's a chiyuv to give to the Kohanim the Bikurim, and then there's a chiyuv to give also the basket. And not necessarily, as the Rebbe will say, that you have to give the basket to the same person you gave the Bikurim. It's two separate. Just any coin you can give, it's a separate chiyuv. Aleph, the Sichos from the Salim with the Bikurim is not Bahava. What is the connection of the baskets with the Bikurim? Is you bring them. The Torah says you bring the Bikurim in the basket. But then you have a din to give it to the kohen. Aber der din avekt geben the Salim to the Kahanim, the halacha to give these baskets to the Kahanim, is a bazunder chiyuv nesina. This is a separate obligation to give. It's not tied to the bikurim. You bring it in the bikurim, and then you have to give the basket to a kohen. Which doesn't have a connection to the obligation of giving the bikurim itself. You give the bikurim and you give the basket. You can give them to two different kahanim, as we'll see. The Rebbe will distinguish that. The only connection that we have is that you bring the bikurim in the basket, but then when you give it, you give the bikurim and then you give the basket. And you don't have to necessarily give it to the same kohen or even to the people of that mishmar. You can give it maybe to any kohen. Number two, the nisina hasalim hobm hot ashayches to the nisina from the bikurim. That giving the gift of the salim, of the basket, have a connection to the giving of the bikurim. But the shayches is not benegei der chiv nisina. But the connection is only as it's in the obligation to give, which means as the chiv nesinas habikurim lahakoyen is goyrer oich the nesinas asalim. The obligation that you have to give bikurim to the kohen also drags with it that you also have to give the basket. But it's still two separate. It's not like the basket and the bikurim are the same, but you have an obligation to give bikurim. You have an obligation to give the basket that comes along with the bikurim. It drags it along the giving of the basket. According to this, as the Rebbe will say, you have to give it to the kohen of that mishmar, who you have to give the bikurim, and you have to also give the basket there. Aber nit, as the Maisa Nisina for the Salim is in himself together with Nisina Sabikurim. But it's not the same. It's not you're giving Bikurim and Salim. Fakert, you're giving this, you're giving two separate things. You're giving the Bikurim and you're giving the basket. The act of giving of the Salim is not the same. It's not like giving the Bikurim. You're giving Bikurim with Salim, but it's still a different nisina. It's the obligation that comes because you're giving the bikurim. You have to also give the baskets, but the obligation of giving baskets and bikurim is not one and the same. The number three is that it's actually bikurim together with the salim, or the nochmer gimel, or there may be more. As the Sichos nicht nur in der Chiva Nisina, it's not just that you have to give, because you have to give bikurim, you also have to give salim. Nor euch in der Maisa Nisina, but also the act. It's one act of giving, it's not two separate acts. Nor euch, the bikurim and the salim darfen gegeben werden. The bikurim and the basket need to be given b'chod machse in one movement, in ein Maisa Nisina, in one act of giving. V'yeshleimar, as is do, anafkimina lidina, zwischen der Ivanim. And we can say that there is an afkimina in din, lepoel mamish, between this way, how we have to give, or to whom we have to give these baskets to. Leuten ersten Eufen, according to the first idea number one. As the Sichos from the Salim for the Bikurim is not in der Havol Beis Hashem Elokeinu, that is to bring the Bikurim connection is just as far as you bring it. The Santa Batana Vaveso, the Beis Hashem Elokeinu, you bring it to the house of God, your God. So it's only the connection between the Bikurim and the baskets is that you just use that to bring it over there. The Nesinas HaSalim, but then giving the basket, Hotke Shayches with Nesinas HaBikurim. Giving the basket has nothing to do with giving the Bikurim. That's a separate issue to give the baskets. The Mela can das gegeben werden, zu welchen Kohen soll nur sein. Therefore, he can give it to any Kohen that he wants. He doesn't have to give it to the Kohen he gave. This is something separate. Buli Shloimar, and perhaps we can say, Azoich Lab Davke, for Anshe Mishmar, maybe he doesn't even have to give it to the people of the Mishmar who you have to give the Bikurim to, because it's a separate giving that you give to the Kohen, maybe not even to the people of the Mishmar. Leuten zweiten Neufen, according to the second possibility, the second way, number two, as der Chiyuv for Nesinas HaSalim is at the Tzor, that giving the Salim is a result for the Chiyuv Nesinas Bikurim, from the obligation of giving Bikurim. So that means you give Bikurim, so as a result, there's also an obligation to give the baskets. It's mistaber, so then it makes sense. It's logical. As it's that gegeben to the Kohanim Shebayisa Mishmar, it has to be given to the Kohanim, which are in that guard, to whom he gives the Bikurim. He also has to give them, because that comes as a result of you give the Bikurim, you also have to give the basket. As the Bikurim Atzman, just as the Bikurim himself. Aber lav davke to themselves Kohen Kohanim, but lav davke to the same Kohen or Kohanim plural, was bakum the Bikurim that receives the Bikurim, because it's not just somebody of the Mishmar, but that the giver doesn't have to be to the same Kohen. But however, according to the third possibility, as the Sichos is euch in them as dar sein ein Meis in the Sinne, that the connection, you have to give it together. It's one act, the Bikurim and the basket. Is Poshut, then it's obvious. As those wird gegeben zum selben Kohen Kohanim, that is given to the same Kohen or Kohanim, and in one act together with the Bikurim, because it's really one act. The act of Bikurim is giving the Bikurim the fruits together with the basket. In Nois Dala, the Rebbe will explain that these three possibilities we just discussed in the giving of the baskets is perhaps the difference, the way we learn the Sifri without the commentary of the Tosfos Yom Tov. The Rebbe learns from the fact that it's just a tena, that you give just a basket, and then it says in the Liskos Matona Lekahanim, so the Rebbe learns that it's possible, not like the Tosfos Yom Tov learned that because it's a poor gift, but it's just to give the Kohanim a separate gift. So there is one pasuk says, Nosata Tena, that there's a gift to give to the Kohen. That's the way we learn the Sifri B'Pashtus. And according to the way the Tosis Yom Tov learns the Sifri, then that is a connection actually because he says they give a very little and they need it to be a more choshev matone, so that it means that it's the bikurim together, the fruit together with the basket. So that would be the third possibility. And the second possibility is what we'll read in the Gemara and the way Rashi teaches that they have to give, that it's one is the giving of the bikurim, and then we say they have to give it away. On top of that, they have to give the basket. So it's the same obligation, but it's an additional. Let's look inside and we'll see how the Rebbe hinges these three possibilities on the way we can learn the Sifri without the Tosfos Yom Tov, the way we learn the Gemara with Rashi, and the way we learn the Sifri with the Tosfos Yom Tov. Dalet. Based on this, we can say, as in dem Bastate, der Chiluk zwischen Drashas Sifri Lifi Muvona Kipshutei, the expounding of the Sifri as we understand it simply without the Tosfos Yom Tov, and then Drashas HaGemara in Baba Kama, the Gemara's Darshans, and then that's accordingly Lifi Pirush Rashi. Rashi explains over there the Aniyim don't want to give the basket to the Kohen, so they if it's expensive, but if it's more, they give the basket to the Kohen. And also, thirdly, the way the Tosfos Yom Tov explains the Sifri and the Pirush Tosfos Yom Tov Chulu b'Sifri, that it says that because it's a cheap present, not good enough, so they want to put it together with the basket, makes it a chashuv everything. So these are the three. Look inside. Aleph. From them was their din as the salim gitman up to the kahanim. The fact that this halacha, that you give the basket to the kahanim, we have a special pasuk. Wert in Sifri abgelernt. The Sifri learns this from pasuk v'lokach hakoyin atan miyidacha, that the kohen takes the basket from your hand. Al sadin meyuchad oifentena. So this is a separate, unique halacha just for the basket. Unoich derfun. So that's number one. So from that aspect of the Sifri, unoich derfun was besima in the Sifri state. In the end of this subject in the Sifri, it stands besalim noisnim lakohanim. He says the baskets you give to the kohanim. So we see that we singled out, and we're talking about baskets as individual, not as part of the bikurim. Tana we learned from a pasuk, and you give the salim, the kohanim, unzoknit beloshen hama'achdom, and it doesn't use the language which would put together the bikurim with the salim. The salim u bikurim nitonim la kohanim. The salim, the bikurim are given to the kohanim. Al derech in their Mishnah, like it says in the Mishnah. Is mashma, it appears as the chiv to give the salim to the kahanim, that the obligation to give these baskets to the kahanim is abzunder inyan ba'nesina. It's a separate aspect in the giving. Nit in the sinas bikurim. That's not the giving of the bikurim. You brought the bikurim in the basket, but then you give the bikurim and you give the baskets. Und das ist kavonas sifri b'siyumei. Now the Rebbe interprets here different than the Tosfos Yom Tov. The Rebbe learns this kipshutei in what is it? Lizkois matona l'kohanim, to merit a gift to the kohanim, which means there's a separate chiyuv, an obligation. As abazunderes chus matona l'kohanim, it's a separate merit, giving a gift to the kohanim. Was there only hot that a poor person whose basket goes to the kohanim, he has a separate merit that he gives a basket to the kohen. The fact that he gives the basket to the kohen, something independently, something separate. That's the way we learn the Sifri, and without bringing in the interpretation of the Tosfos Yom Tov. Then we have Beis in Gemara Baba Kama. Wo the Mishnah wird gebracht als Mocker of them, the Mishnah is brought, the Gemara brings the Mishnah as a source of them was Amri Inshi Bosar Anya Azli Aniyusa. That after the poor goes the poor. So is Muchach. Von dem was Rashi bavoren dort bifirushay. So the fact that Rashi cautions us in his commentary, Rashi says, "Va'ashirim lo yehoyu noisnim klatei sehen lakoyin." That the wealthy did not give the holders, the vessels, they didn't give them to the kohen. So you see that giving it or not giving it, the nesinas hasalim from the aniyim zum kohen, that the giving from the kohen, that seems to the kohen, hot hashayches mitzeyer aniyis diker nesina from bekurim. So that is connected because the rich ones didn't want to give. So the poor ones, they gave the bikurim, they gave also. So there's a connection. Umizeh. So from this we see, as they given, so they're giving, but they're not giving enough. So it means they're giving from to the same coin that they're giving, but they don't give enough. So therefore, as they give avek the salim, benoisef to benisinas habikurim. In addition to giving the bikurim, so there's bikurim, and then they add the basket to it. But on the other hand, is the Weini talking a chochet to zogen, but we don't have any evidence to say as the salins or lahob ma'ashayches to the bikurim atzim not kedekach. They should have such a connection as a nesina is on dafn zayin ma'aseh that the giving should be one. Yes, they have to give this in addition to that. It's not a separate giving. It is related to the bikurim because you're giving it in addition to the bikurim because they give it away because it's a small gift, so it's addition. But it doesn't mean that it has to be given together, that it's really one giving. Am I saying as well nit as massing given the lotion azli aniyusa, it wouldn't be lotion aniyusa follows, which means that it's not, they have one thing because they're poor, and then goes, so it's a separate thing. The giving of the basket is a separate thing because azli, it follows baniyusa. Had these baskets been part, according to this understanding, part of the giving of the bikurim, it wouldn't be following. It would be it's one giving, so it's not azli aniyusa. So therefore, it's mashma that yes, that it is connected to the bikurim, but it's not that it's one ma'aseh. But the way the Tosfos Yontif Gimel learns, Leut in Pirishat Tosfos Yontif v'chulu in Sifri, the way the Tosfos Yontif learns in the Sifri, Shani Meviyim At V'im Hasal Yinech Shematona, that the Niyim bring a little bit, so that together when we add the basket to their gift, it's going to be considered a gift. As their sal is azevi mashlim the bikurim. That is, so to say, that the basket sort of completes and makes up the bikurim as a zon zaynech matona, that it should be considered a gift. Is mistaber zu, then it's logical to say, as the sinas hasalim darv zayn bin sinna matona achs with the bikurim, that it has to be giving the basket needs to be in one giving with the bikurim. That makes it a matona. So that the bikurim should be enough to give. So the Rebbe learns the two pshatim in the Sifri according to the pshat, simply without the Tosfos Yontif. That means that the Nesina, according to the first, simply is totally separate, not connected at all. The way to the bikurim is one thing to bring bikurim. You bring it in the basket, but then the giving away of the basket is something independent. There's nothing to do with the bikurim. And you can give it to any kohen that you want, not even from that mishmor l'chera. And the second interpretation from the Gemara, that the Gemara says no, that the rich people don't give it, but the poor people give it, seems that it drags along. It follows the bikurim, but it doesn't become together one act with the bikurim. Adrab azli anayus is mashma, that it follows. So it is actually needs to be as a follow-up to the Bikurim, but it can be brought to the other people from that same Mishmar because it's not one thing. But the Tosfos Yontif that learns in the Sifri, that it's really, you have to give the Bikurim in the basket. So in order for the basket to be something choshev, then it becomes one Nisina. Giving the Bikurim together with the basket makes it a choshev Nisina of Bikurim. Now the Rebbe explains in Ois Hey that the Rambam actually holds that there's even a deeper connection. It's not only that the Bikurim with the Keli in their become one giving, but it's really, there is not separate. You can't separate Bikurim from the Keli. The Keli together with the Bikurim, which makes it Bikurim. The reason the Rebbe says that by a klematches, its pshat is he gets it back, which means it had to be part of the bikurim. Is it has to be with the keli. The keli becomes part of the bikurim. The only thing is the keli will be returned later on if it's an expensive keli. But you first you fulfill the mitzvah because it's inseparable. That's part of the mitzvah of bikurim. Let's look inside. Hey. As the Rambam learned in dem afert neufen, can say the Rambam learns actually a fourth way. And an additional novelty above that we learned in the previous possibilities. Nit nor is der Sal verbunden mit die Bekurim. In der Maisa Nisina, not only, as in the last case, the last possibility, that the basket is tied with the bikurim in the act of giving, that you give the bikurim together with their basket, nor es wird ve'ein zach in the bikurim v'avosa bikurim, but it becomes one. It's not bikurim and a basket, but this is the bikurim. The bikurim together with the basket becomes one thing of the bikurim v'avos bikurim. Bringing bikurim is a basket with fruit. When is the shleimus habikurim v'shalkiv mitzvosum? When is the completeness of bikurim and the fulfillment of the mitzvah of havos bikurim? B'shas the peiros werden gebracht in akeli. When the fruit are brought in akeli, and the keli wird v'atel from the bikurim. The keli becomes part of the bikurim. This is also part of the bikurim. B'signen achar, to use a different style. The Sichos is not nor in the poyel pula, not only in the act and the accomplishment, as in the second and the third way, that there is a connection between the basket with the person doing it, brings the basket, and the act, it has the basket there, and in them nifel, as it's accomplished, it becomes one. So the bikurim and the basket are really one. That is bikurim. Und das macht der Rambam klar. And the Rambam clarifies this. Mit dem, was stellt die Halache, havim beklamatches chulu, behemshech zu der friedrich Halache, that he brings this Halache, that he brings them in a klimatches, he brings it as a follow-up to the previous Halache, habikurim to unim kli. In the previous Halache, he says, bikurim require a vessel. So, it's part of the mitzvah of bikurim that bikurim need a keli, and that's how the Rambam brings these further halacha of the difference between which kelim you bring. Nicht wie in der Mishnah, wo das wird gebracht als a besonder din v'halacha. The Mishnah is brought as a separate din halacha in an oifun ha'avo von ashirim v'anim. It's brought as a law. How do rich people bring poor people? That's the way it's brought down in the Mishnah. Here, the Rambam brings down the keli as a continuation to the halacha itself that bikurim are brought in a keli. Thus haste, which means as keli, this means as the keli is verbunden und wird ein Sach mit die bikurim, that the keli is connected and becomes one thing with the bikurim. Und in dem Din ist nicht talking chilik zwischen ein Sukkei und der zweiten. In this halacha that you need one bikurim with the keli, there's no difference which keli it is. There's not that in one keli it becomes and the other keli doesn't become. It's always bikurim is the fruit with the basket. That is bikurim. Und das, wo der Rambam ist mechalik zwischen Klei Matches und Klei Arova v'chalof. The fact that the Rambam does change and he makes a difference between metal kelis and the willow cane baskets is not the farvos by Klei Matches is do adin miyuchat. It's because by Klei Matches there gets a special halacha. Kedir klosh Rambam. Rambam says it's returned. It's not that it was never given. The bikurim can't be without a basket. The basket is part of the bikurim. By the matches, the keli goes back to its owner. It's returned. This haste. Mitzad the bikurim u'mitzvahs have va'osom. From the perspective of the bikurim and the mitzvah bringing them, the keli, even if it's a metal keli, it becomes one thing with the bikurim. Was dafke durch them only together with the basket wird aufgetan the mitzvah sasei lavi bikurim lamigdosh, the positive mitzvah to bring bikurim to migdosh. You need it to bring with a basket, with the metal basket. She's norvos nog them is choizer akli b'olov. The vessel goes back and is returned to its owner. As ervet nit momen kohen, it doesn't become the money of the kohen, and you give it back to the owner. But the bikurim was brought together with the kelim. Mashenkin by klirova b'chalof u'kiyotzbem ein choizer doesn't return. The keli bleibt ein zach mit the bikurim euch später. It remains one thing with the bikurim of later. That's the continuation. That's the bikurim together with the keli. Over there, it is brought back. Und dem tam hafresh yesh leimar. So what's the difference? Why is it by matches it's returned and here not? By klimatches bald as the shaykhs bineim is nor mitzad dem din habikurim tunim keli. Since the connection between the fruit and the keli is only because bikurim need a keli, so that becomes the connection between the bikurim and the keli. The riber is der verbund von der keli mit the peiris from bikurim. So therefore, the tie of the keli with the peiris bikurim nor benegei likim mitzvah. It's only to fulfill the mitzvah. Havos bikurim beis Hashem alikecha, to bring the bikurim to the house of God your God. Ober by klei arova v'chalof u'kiyitzbem. But when we're talking about these less expensive baskets of arova v'chalof and similar, was euch b'mitzius u'ma'ativis haben ze ashayches, that they also have a natural connection to that fruit, the fruit that they brought in. These expensive vessels or matches, you don't bring fruit in matches, so therefore there is a connection only because of the mitzvah bringing them together, but there's no real connection. Fruit you bring in a basket, and so there's no natural, but by Klechalov there's a natural connection. Also, at least in their value, Hashiva Shalom. So there is a connection between a basket and the fruit. So then that helps to define the keli that is in them, bikurim to keli, that bikurim require a keli, as dos vert legamri ve'ein zach midepedis, that becomes something one, united with the fruits. Al derech with the klipa from the pedis bikurim asma, just like the peels of the pedis bikurim themselves. The pikil, so the keli, which is really part of the fruits and it's in value, and it doesn't separate, so therefore it becomes inherently part of that bikurim, and it's not separated, as opposed to the metal piece, because metal doesn't have an inherent connection. It's only the Torah connects them. So as soon as you're done with that mitzvah bringing them, then that's what the Rebbe adds in the bracket that you can say the chiluk between klimatches, that they don't have an inherent natural connection to the fruit, and therefore once the fruit is done, it becomes one, the mitzvah of avod, then it becomes separate, then it goes back to the owner. But when we talk about something which is meant for fruit and it's usually more connected to the fruit, so then that makes that it becomes part, that basket becomes part of the fruit, just like the peel of the fruit itself. In Ois Vav, the Rebbe now says that this interpretation in the Rambam, that the salim and the bikurim, the basket, the bikurim, and the fruits are really one thing, actually explains different languages. You see the exact languages in the Rambam. The Rebbe is going to go through in which the Rambam emphasizes that the togetherness, that the basket are really part and parcel of the bikurim. Vav al pi anal v'tzukum and hasbore v'amtoke in noch kama shinuyim v'diyukim, in additional changes and specific language, b'divrei u'b'lshein Rambam, in the words and in the language of the Rambam. Aleph. The Rambam, first of all, doesn't talk about the person. It doesn't talk about the person. It just talks about the vessels. Er is mashmid the hadgoshe wegen dem gavre. He takes away. He doesn't bring down the emphasis about the person that brings oshir v'oni. He doesn't bring anything about the person. Uret nor wegen meisa ha'avor. He only talks about the act of bringing b'yachas la'chefze shel bikurim, as it relates to the object of the bikurim. He talks about Heviyom b'kli matches, heviyom b'kli arava v'chalav. He's talking about the way it's brought. It's not about the person. It's not about the oni. It's not about the usher. It's about that it's brought in a kli matches. Was dos is moving the pashas canal, which that is understood very simply. Why he says this is because it's not. It has to do only with the keli. The keli is part of the bikurim. That is part of the chefts of the bikurim. It doesn't make a difference who is the one who brings it, the ashu, the ani, as the Rebbe explained earlier. Number two, base, that is meshanu mashmit. He changes, and he doesn't bring down the Lashon HaMishnah on Oich from Sifri, and also from the Sifri Ugemora, Vasalim Vahabikurim Noistim or Nitonim Lakahanim. That the Salim, the Bikurim are given. He doesn't talk about giving them. He doesn't talk about the gift of the Salim and the Bikurim. Zogendik Harea Bikurim Vasalim Lakahanim. He only says these, they are to the Kahanim, not given to the Kahanim, but they are to the Kahanim. Lahadgish, to emphasize, as er Sheiches Zelazeh is nit mugbal in, it is not limited to leave, and because then it's sin lakoyin. Nor zezainem ve'ein zach, but it's as one item. Habikurim vasalim. It's not that you give them. The bikurim vasalim are to the Kahanim. Was belonging to Kohen, as to emphasize again that this is really one and the same. You can't distinguish between them. You don't give them. It's not the person giving them. It is the bikurim are together. Number three, and as Mahapich them say there is in their Mishnah. He changes the order as brought down in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, it says Hasalim v'habikurim, first the Salim and then the bikurim. Und schreibt, the Rambam writes Habikurim v'hasalim, first the bikurim, then the Salim. Aval Piyaz Asalim is the Chiddush. We're talking about the Salim here, the Bikurim we know. So why does he start first saying the Bikurim and the Salim are to the Kohen, but he should say first, as the Gemara says, the Bikurim, I should say Hasalim v'Bikurim. While the Loshen Hasalim v'Bikurim git an orzu medayzah, because if he would say, like the Gemara, the basket and the Bikurim, that gives room to derive as the Salim ständig frier, because their first is a besondere for the Bikurim. Salim is one, and then separate the Bikurim. The Fash schreibt the Rambam, but the Rambam switches the order. Ha Bikurim va Salim was their mitis mudgis. That way it's emphasized as the salim and nimshach and koruf, that these basket continue and they're wrapped and they follow the aprat for the bikurim. They're a detail of the bikurim. It's the uh, salim and the bikurim, that the bikurim and the salim, that it's not something. The salim is not separate than the bikurim. It's the bikurim which goes together with the salim. The salim are part and parcel of the bikurim. And number 4, er is misayim da halacha v'im nitma bikurim ein salim lekan. If the bikurim are become tomei, then the salim doesn't go to the kahanim. Behesem v'ketitzah from their teuchen halacha. That is fits and is a result of the halacha. As the salim zan in ein zach with the bikurim, that the salim are one thing with the bikurim. Was the far is by the salim nageya machriya the matziva bikurim chulon. That's why, because it's one. It's not a separate thing, so we're not going to give them the salim. If we don't, it's same thing. The idea is salim are part of the bikurim. So if the bikurim are tamei, the salim go along. They don't get the salim. It's nageya machriya the matziva bikurim chulon. So the Rebbe basically says that these all languages fit in together with the general idea that the Rebbe brought down over here, that the Rambam holds that the Salim and the Bikurim are really actually one and the same. In Ois Zayin, the Rebbe explains, why is it that Bikurim, which is the highest level, represents Yidden at the highest level, need to be dafki in a keli, need to be limited? Zayin. The Sichos. We have to understand, however, still the connection between the inner matter of things, between Bikurim with the vessel. Ubefrat, especially Kli Arova v'Chalof, talking about it's especially connected. These are the kelim that remain with the Bikurim even after they're given, as opposed to the other kelim. Why is that such a limitation? Bikurim, Bikurim emphasize the total greatness, wholesomeness, completeness, bepashtus, begashmi, man. Very simply, the physical thing, atzmam, if you take a look, what are the bikurim? Meireshis, they're from the beginning, Gomer. And ein mevim bikurim elo meshivas haminim amurim b'shvach. You only bring bikurim from those 7 species, which are spoken of when we praise the land of Eretz Yisrael. They're the best. V'im hevi chutz meshivas haminim. If you bring besides these 7 species, loin is kachu, they have not become holy. And also, generally and spiritually, also bikurim are only brought einim nahogim elu b'fnei habayis. It only is a custom. It only applies when the Beis Hamikdash is there. Uberetz Yisrael b'vad, and only in Eretz Yisrael. The Eretz asher goimer tomid eina Hashem elokecha bo mereishis hashana v'achar shana, which means only in Eretz Yisrael where there is always godliness. Okay, now, and as we said before, so spiritually it's when Eretz Yisrael Beis Hamikdash. Physically, it's the best of the land. Canal is the minim gufa dafn zayin bereshis, that within the species itself they need to be from the first, the best, for the peres achim uvchorim, from the most choicest fruit. Ein mevim loy mit morim shebahorim, you can't bring from the dates that are on the mountains, loy mit peres shebamokim, and not from fruits that are in the valleys, veloy mizeise shemen she'eino min hamuvchor, and not from olive oil olives that are not from the best elamit morim sheba mokim. But tamarim you bring, that's better, that's in the valleys, better dates, not from the mountains but in the valleys. We pay the shebahorim, and fruit you have to need the mountains, but it's better lefi shehemin amufchar. That's the choicest. Vim hevi loinis kachu. If you bring them not become kodesh, that's from the Rambam, that we have to bring only the best. So on one hand, we have the bikurim, which are the best on the highest level. And together with this, we say, as bikurim to unim kli, that bikurim require a vessel. As kedushas bikurim v'ki mitzvos misvabudu mitakeli bagbola, that the sanctity of the bikurim and how do you fulfill them, mitzvah is connected to a keli. Ubiyachadim zeh zokt man as bikurim tunim keli, which means that they need a keli, the bikurim. As kedushas bikurim v'kiyum mitzvosom is verbunden mit hakeli v'hagbola, that it's tied to a vessel and agbola. It's the highest level bikurim, and it's tied to a agbola, tied to a kelo nochmer. Fusim halacha barambam, from the end halacha of the Rambam. V'im nitma bikurim was damot felt in shlemus hamitzvah from bikurim. If the bikurim became defiled, and then there is lacking in the mitzvah bikurim, says nitod de hanocha lifnei hamizbech. You can't put it before the mizbech. Ein hasalim lekohanim. Then you can't give the sound to the Kohanim. Is move on. As when the Salim bleiben yeah by the Kohanim, when the Salim remain by the Kohanim, is those Hashlemus Mailim Bikurim. That's a wholesomeness and an advantage of the Bikurim. That it gets to stay by the Kohanim. But those is Shaykh Kanal Davke Baya Kliya Rov V'chalof. And which vessel stays there? Not the regular expensive vessel, not a matches, and not kesef, but only if it's a Kliya Rov V'chalof. Dvorim Pshutim. Adverch Pseidus Gorim V'yokin. This is a very simple thing, similar to the Pseidus Gorim V'yokin, left over of the Gorim V'yokin, but not the Chashivas. So what's going on here? Vikumtes, and it's short. Vikumtes as by Bikurim was eine Kishmon Bikurim. Why is it by Bikurim, which are named Bikurim, the Erste and the best, the B'Shevach Horetz? They're the first and the best in the praise of the land. Was davon gebracht werden in Beis Hashem Elokeinu, that need to be brought in the house of God our God. We got to bring this in front of the Mizbeach of God your God. That's where we have to bring them. So the Shleim sein verbunden davke, that when is it really complete mit keli? It needs to bring a keli. Ubegila yoser, and more revealed b'kli arov chalof. That's tama keli in a kli arov chalof. That's when it's a good. That's when it remains, and that's when it's good. What's the connection? Because Yeshleimer der bir b'zeh. So we can say the explanations. You do has bikurim zayin meramis avid. Bikurim hint for Yid. The Pasuk says, just as a date, when it ripens in the beginning, that's how I saw the fig. When it ripens in the beginning, that's how I saw your fathers. That the te'ena, in the beginning, that's how I saw your fathers. With the Tzemach Tzedek is Mevar Barucha, as the Tzemach Tzedek explains at length. As the inyan from Bikurim Weiss of Neshamas Yisrael, that the Bikurim references shows on the Jewish soul is eine B'shorshon L'mayla as they're rooted above. Was dort is Machshavton Shel Yisrael Kodmo L'chol Dover. Over there, the thought of Yidden comes before anything. Kodmo L'Torah. In its root, Yidden come before Torah. Was their far is their din. That's why the din is as Bikurim. You got to first bring the Bikurim even before you separate the Truma. Even though both the Truma and the Bikurim are referred to as Reishis, the beginning, the Pasuk calls them Reishis. From deswegen seine Bikurim koidem le Truma, and yet Bikurim come before Truma, even before. While the Reishis from Truma, because the beginning of Truma, Oisius, Torah Mem, is that Inyan HaTorah is the idea of Torah. Was of Torah state Havaya Konononi Reishis Darke. So Truma is Takev the beginning, but it's Torah man. It's the level of Torah. Istake is that Inyan HaTorah was of Torah state Hashem Kononi Reishis Darke, that Hashem has acquired it. It's the beginning of his path. So Torah is Reishis. It is a Reishis. Aber that's the Reishis of Torah. The Reishis for Bikurim is Maramas of Yid. But the Reishis of Bikurim, it's even before that references that hints for the Yid. Was of Zeh State Kodesh Yisrael Hashem, Reishis was they about the Yidden, it says that the Yidden are holy to Hashem. They're the beginning of his Tuvosoi, of his grain, of the grain of Hashem. So we are the Reishis. Und Kishem Yisrael Kodmul Torah, just as Eden are before Torah, Azoy Zayin Bikurim Kodmul Truma, so that's why Bikurim come before Truma. So the two Reishis of Truma and Bikurim, the Reishis of Truma represents Torah, and the Reishis of Bikurim represents Eden. Well, now, as the neshama is lamayla is called luchol dover, the neshama above comes before everything. It stands there, connected, cleaving, and the living God. Hashem, I stood before him, was before Hashem. To the extent that we call it the neshama, Torah was love Torah. Alpha became. Yet the neshama comes down. Dafki here below Akeli video. On shame, the Yisrael Kodmul Torah, just as the Yidden come before Torah, as Zoyzayin Bikurim Kodmul Truma, Bikurim come before Truma. On Afal Pi. As the neshama v'zi is lamayla is kodmul chodover, and the state we already said this. Dort dat weekes bokim chaim k'meshe kosu chai v'ashem atlefonov biz b'bchinas toirehi avol pikein kum the neshama rob do lamato dafki na keli neshama v'guf. Was his magbil which limits ir gilu hakesh mit neibishten the revealed connection with Hashem. Und noch mehr the keli is mailim and mastir of the Dveksan Hashem Belakus, even more that the vessel blocks and obscures on the connection of the Shama Godliness. Similar to the Bikurim coming into the Keli. Is the Chabar Yedu as the Yerida Gedolim Iger Rama Lebira Mikta. That this great descent from this rooftop to the deep abyss is Kedai. It's worth it. It's a descent for the purpose of an elevation. Specifically by descending below into the vessels of the body, there is such an elevation accomplished by the soul. As it becomes even higher from the matzav is given than her condition that she was above in its root. Through that it's revealed in the neshama the true level of Bikurim. Those was his Einzach Kaviyachal, the fact that she's one thing, so to speak, Mitatzmusi is Baruch, which is essence. Yisrael v'kutshabricha kuluchad, Yisrael and the Ebrish are one. Ukshem bedosis b'negeya klolus yiridas al-neshama lamata. Just as we talk about the descent of the neshama goes below into the body, as those befrat in avedus odin dolamata. So very in detail, this also is reflected in the service of the person over here below. The ultimate goal in the service of man expresses itself mainly not so much in her service in spiritual matters, the love and the fear of the soul, but specifically by fulfilling the practical mitzvahs. Mitzvahs by fulfilling the mitzvahs in actuality, which is done specifically with the lowest parts of the body. Azoi, in action, this lowest part of the body, not the brains, not the intellect, but it's done with the maise, the action. So as the ganze Metzius from Guvert Akele v'chelik shel kedushas haneshama, so that now the entire existence of the body becomes a vessel and a part of the sanctity of the neshama. Tutzich oiv de ashleimus haliyah shel neshama. That's how you accomplish the wholesome elevation of the soul. In a way, as the gilu ha'atzmi la'osid lovei bizman atchiyah. The revelation of Atzmas in the future to come at the time of Tchiyah Beis Hashem Elokeinu. When you bring the Bikurim to Beis Hashem Elokeinu, so the Medzayin l'Neshama is Begufim Dafke. So it's Dafke in the bodies, the Aliyahs, the eventual, the ultimate will be Neshama Beguf Dafke. This man in Tchiyas HaMeisim will be when the ultimate will be there, because it's the body impact in the lowest part, that everything should be permeated with the level of kedusha, and that's why it will come down to Shabbos Begufim. Because the time of the Reif is that Alter Rebbe is Mevayer. The reason for this, the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, Agabe Klolus Oilomis, with regards to the worlds in general, as the Tachlis Ishtalshus Oilomis Viridosim Madrega Madrega. The goal that the worlds evolved from one level, descended from level to level. It's not for the upper worlds. That's not the goal to come down. For them, this is a descent from the light of Hashem's blessed continents. The goal is this world, this lower world. Which is the lowest in level, where there's no lower than it. That's the goal. Hashem wants his dwelling place in the lower worlds. And it's specifically through this, that this lower world, it becomes a dwelling place for him, blessed. That brings about an elevation in all of the order of evolution, also in the very upper worlds. So similarly, it's also as it pertains to the soul. Specifically by its descent in this world, this lower world, in the vessels of the body, and it accomplishes the intent of making for him blessed a dwelling place in the lower worlds. But this is specifically through the act in Elam Haza. Und dort Guf, and within Elam Haza, in the Bechinas Tachten Shaboy, in the lowest level, that's in Elam Haza. Kiyuma mitzvah v'maisa, to do the mitzvahs in action. That accomplishes the ultimate, the full purity and holiness for the neshama and the guf, for the soul and for the body, and also for both together. And in that itself consists the elevation, and that remains, that consists the advantage of the neshama, which is even higher than what it had beforehand, the tar and the kedusha that it gets through bringing down the tachtonim by the observance of mitzvahs b'maisa, the making Hashem adir b'tachtonim. Just as this is the content, spiritual and inner meaning of bikurim, this is also when you fulfill the mitzvahs literally. How do they come to the house of God, their God, the place where Hashem Elikim wants to rest his name there, that is the ultimate, the wholesome of the Kedusha is Dafka Alidei Keli. You have to use a Keli, unin Keli Gufa, and within the Keli is this Agdus HaKeli Letomid. It's a uniting the Keli for always. In a Keli from the Voram Achib Shut B'chusim, in a vessel from matters that are very simple and low, Ein Tach Lamata Mimenu, nothing lower, Kli Arova V'chalof, these smallest Keli, becomes one with them, and that's the way you bring him to the base of Lekenu, the ultimate holiness and greatness for these Bikurim. Through our occupation, laws of Bikurim, is in Torah Achas, as it is in one Torah, Nigla Torah, the revealed part of Torah, and the inner part of Torah, and in the Zman, when to Melentus in the Torah, and the time when you learn it and you read it in the Torah, Vados is Euch, there's land from Avos Bikurim, you bring the proper time to bring the Bikurim. You can bring and read, not just bring it. You can bring it Shasimcha Machag Hashavuos Atzeva Chag, from Shavuos until the end of Sukkot. Is Ma'arki Mabrocha. Then you hasten the fulfillment of the blessing Miyad, Memele Vetzayin, As Tishan L'Shana Haba, as the blessing that you get when you bring the Bikurim. Repeat it again next year, bring Bikurim. Avos Bikurim Bepashtus. So we could bring literally the Bikurim, the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, the third Beis HaMikdash, Yibonim B'Meheda B'Yameinu, which will be built speedily in our days, all the Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'Simcha B'Chol HaToiv, and the joy in all good, B'Chol HaToiv Asher Hashem V'Samachto B'Chol HaToiv. You'll rejoice in all the good that Hashem. Samach Simchas Olam Al Reisham, the eternal Simcha on their hair. This is Sichos Shabbos Parshas Tovo Tovshin Daled Mem.